Hi, I'm Dr. Kyla, Paediatric Dietitian, fussy eating specialist and mum of two. I'm the founder of the online Mealtimes memberships that help parents just like you experience a confident and guilt-free way of feeding children. I'm also a business owner, a hot cross bun lover, and my superpower is finding things that you cannot live without. In this podcast, I'm talking about feeding your family, along with a random selection of topics that tickle my fancy. Welcome to Mealtimes with Dr. Kyla. Today's guest is my colleague and friend, Gina Journe, from my very own Mealtimes team. Gina is a paediatric dietitian. She's the lead of our Toddler Mealtimes membership. She does a lot of our member consults and mothers groups. And I can say this about her while she's listening and she'll blush, I know, but she's just one of the most kind and balanced and clever dietitians I've worked with. And one of the things I love about her is that she really understands the real world challenges that our members have, and I think that any kind of clients she has, and really works with people to support them in a practical way. And I think that's a real strength of hers. I might throw to her. Welcome, Gina. And maybe you can tell me a bit about yourself.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. And you're right.
It is, when we're just like chatting as friends.
It's always very cringy to hear nice things being said about yourself. But yes, so I have been part of the Mealtimes team for 2 years. We've just sort of realised.
Blows my mind. It feels like forever, but also like just last week.
Yes. And I think that's the crazy thing, that I had to actually go back to some of my dietetic friends and sort of figure out how long have I been a dietitian for. So it has been 4 years, so actually not that long really, but I do also feel that I've had quite a varied experience in that time too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously 2 years of that being with you, which has been amazing. But before that, doing some like clinical work in the hospital and some private practice too, which definitely I think has, the private practice particularly, had a big impact on how I think about food, but we can get into that a bit later.
And teasing ahead, I like it.
Yes, yeah, that's a little teaser for you. But so about me, yes, I don't know, I'm just your usual sort of 30-something woman. I have a beautiful dog who is probably my life really at the moment. My partner works out in Northam, so there is often a lot of time where it is me and Archie working from home life. He is my colleague a lot of the time.
He's present in this interview?
Yes, he is. He's currently under the desk. That's his usual spot. But other than that, I just like cooking. I love food. I love talking about food and everything that entails, really.
Which kind of like leads into our discussion, I guess, because I invited Gina on the podcast so you can get to know some of our Mealtimes team, but also because we had a really interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the things that we used to believe about food, you know, particularly as students or as kind of early career dietitians. And then it got so juicy that I was like, stop, we cannot talk about this in real life. We must talk about it in the podcast. So I've made Gina come on and, share all her interesting personal examples and my own personal examples. So I haven't actually let you tell me. You've alluded that there's some interesting kind of facts to come. So I'm quite ready to hear them. And I guess for context for anybody listening, we were kind of talking about how much our views about food and bodies in particular have changed in the last 5 years or so, I would say, which kind of coincides for you as to when you kind of graduated. And for me, I think like early career, I was always reasonably balanced in the advice that I gave people. But when I think about some of the things that I believed personally about food or the things that I applied to myself, I think have changed so considerably, which hopefully is a reflection of what we're seeing in society now, that there's this kind of appreciation for the negative impact of diet culture and how much potential damage is done by associating fear and guilt and shame with food, with body size. This is something I talk about now a lot, but it's only a fairly recent development for me that I feel like really able to talk about some of these things. And then it's super interesting to look back on what we used to think and what we used to believe. So maybe if you're new here, I'll throw to Gina and just rope her in for the definition. Give me a kind of, how would you describe diet culture?
Okay, so the Butterfly Foundation describes diet culture as a set of ever-changing myths about food and bodies that promote the idea that someone's body weight reflects their health and that foods can be simplistically categorized into good and bad. It really focuses on thinness while masking this fear of being fat. So essentially, it really underpins a lot of what we think about food and bodies in our society, and it's wrong. We know that now.
I think we're still learning, though, the
Yes.
depth of it, right? Like, there are still things that surprise me when I hear other people speak about, food or bodies.
Absolutely.
In my family, my friendship group, just the general public, but also kind of the initial thoughts that crop up for me sometimes are a throwback to like what we've all learned in the last 30, 40 years, and we're starting to see, I think, the change. And I think it's really interesting for us because a lot of students in particular are drawn to study things like nutrition and dietetics through maybe a kind of misplaced obsession with food and health, like that real kind of hyper focus around like food and nutrients and what that means. And I think for both of us, like, we used to think in ways that make us cringe quite considerably.
So cringy, terrible.
So cringy. And I thought it'd be really interesting to reflect back on some of the things that we used to believe, the things that we used to do, and maybe how much we've changed since then. And I'll just throw in, I think it might be worth having a content warning here because we probably are going to talk about some of our own examples of disordered eating, or the beliefs that we had that weren't true, that were probably based around restriction or control, or a bit of obsession, which might not be helpful for some people to hear. So if that's you, like, totally fine to skip out of this one. Maybe we start at the beginning. What about, like, as a child or teenager, what was your kind of experience with food or bodies?
So I guess when I think about food in my childhood, it actually feels quite unremarkable, probably in a good way, really. Yeah, Mum was in charge of meals. So she did the bulk of the cooking in our family. And both my parents are English, so we just had typical English meals. There was a lot of shepherd's pie and casseroles and things. I still cannot eat steamed cabbage for the I'm like, that is done. Cabbage. Yeah, that is done forever. I will never. But I don't ever recall feeling concerned about the foods that my family were feeding me being good or bad or anything like that. I do remember being told to sort of finish what was on my plate. And, this is what we're having for dinner. That's it, type thing. Particularly finishing what's on your plate. That's still something that I'm working on today.
Me too. And mine comes from a sense of guilt. Like, I should kind of show an appreciation for, like, if somebody at a restaurant has cooked me a meal, that they'll think I don't like it if I don't eat the whole thing, which is the whole people pleasing,
Yes.
part of
yeah. So it's probably a little bit more complicated than being told you must finish your plate.
It's a big part of it too, isn't it? Yeah. I would say mine wasn't significantly different. I do remember my mum doing diets or following kind of Easy Slim, or being on kind of, changing programs, I guess, or things that kind of cropped up. But I don't ever remember it being kind of punishment based, or, I don't remember it being a big part of our life. And if I think about myself as a child and teenager, I had a big appetite. Like, I ate really well. I enjoyed food. But I do remember a period of time at high school where I was trying to like record what I ate in an attempt to eat less. And I had this picture. I remember this picture of a thigh gap, essentially, like a lady whose legs did not touch, which is wild because that is not my body shape and never will be my body shape regardless of my actual weight. But I was like, okay, if I can just eat less, like, that's where I'm heading. And I remember like the actual scrapbook. It was like an old primary school scrapbook that I had like recorded these things. But that was kind of the extent as to, I think half the time I would start these things and be like, oh, this is too hard. Like, stuff it. I'll be fine. But that's my only real kind of red flag.
What age do you think you were?
I reckon it would have been about 15 or 16.
Yeah, it's such an interesting age, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's so many, things going on with your body at that point, and with peer pressure and social things, and yeah. Yeah. But I think we were quite lucky. Like, if I think about my teenagehood, like, I wasn't particularly cool. I tried to have cool clothes, but they were like long board shorts and surfy tops. You know, they weren't like boob tube dresses and, you know, like tiny little skimpy things. And I wonder if that would have made it harder if I was trying to fit into particular kind of shaped things.
Yeah, definitely.
I definitely do not want to be a teenager in this kind of era. All right. Tell me then about, did you go straight into uni? No, you had a little bit of time before.
Oh, so before I did nutrition, I did architecture. So that feels like a whole nother lifetime ago. But so yes, coming out of that, I decided, no, I needed to do something different. And that's when I sort of fell into the nutrition stuff. But I think this is probably a good time to talk about what I teased with you earlier.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
But yeah, this is not something I talk about very often. And it's a funny one. It's not that I'm embarrassed, but it just doesn't align with my values anymore. And so it's not something that I would openly tell somebody, especially somebody that I've met for the first time or when I'm meeting them new.
Or someone that you've known for 2 years and worked with. So tell me now.
Literally. So I was just going to say, there are definitely lots of people in my life that would not know this about me. So about 10 years ago, I entered a pageant.
Did you?
And so,
oh.
yeah, at the time, I remember there being some girls that I'd been to high school with that had done it the year before, and they'd done quite well. And, you know, there were prizes and, I don't know, free things, and it looked very glamorous. It looked amazing. So I thought, you know what? Well, if they can do it, why can't I do it? What I didn't realize is that actually this was going to be my real introduction into like diet culture and body comparison.
Yeah, wow.
These kind of ideas that I'd somehow been fairly unaffected by in my childhood. Like you said, there's always little things, but it hadn't been a big part of my life. And this period of time I spent, it was probably 5 or 6 months with this cohort of women, some of which I'm still really good friends with today. So
like you make good friendships in those, like.
Yes. Yeah. But it was the first time in my life that I actually felt different and I felt bigger. And like, this is also coming from someone I want to acknowledge, like I am in a fairly slim body, like, you know, so when I was in this competition, I felt uncomfortable. I would compare myself to these other women. And for the first time in my life, I was like, I am too big to be here. There's something wrong with me.
How much time are you spending with these people?
It was quite a lot because there'd be events on every few weeks.
Yeah.
But we'd also, there were nice things about it. Like we did a lot of boxing. That was part of the thing. It was sponsored by a boxing club. I think it was like $5 or $10 for a boxing class. So that was so cheap. And I loved it. The boxing was amazing. What I didn't love was that we would go out for coffee after boxing on a Saturday morning and someone would be saying how fat she thought she was. Yeah. And, you know, it was just so upfront. People would comment so openly on their own body. That really shocked me.
Do people comment on other people's bodies?
No. And well, not in the groups that I sort of, I guess, gathered with.
Yeah.
But hearing someone else say like, oh, I am so fat, or look at my thighs, when I was sitting there, I'm thinking, well, I'm clearly bigger than you. So what, if you're saying that about yourself, what do you think of me?
Yeah.
And that was a really challenging time. One of my favorite quotes that has just stuck with me for my entire life, I will never forget this. It was after we'd had a particular parade and someone had bought some lollies. And I will never forget, one of the girls said, the yellow lollies aren't worth it.
Oh my God.
And I always think back at that and I'm like, if she had have said, I don't like yellow lollies, wouldn't have made that's nothing, right? We all have a flavour we don't love. But to say they're not worth it, I was like, what is it? They're not worth the sugar. They're not worth
the calories.
You're going to gain weight from a yellow lolly. So that really, I think, triggered my awareness of food and bodies for the first time, like properly in my life.
And did that change the way you ate, do you think?
I would say probably, yeah. And there were like some of the people that I hung out with. One of the girls, lovely, she really wanted to do a juice cleanse. So she was convincing other people to do a juice cleanse with her. I signed up for a juice cleanse, which is,
wow.
I think about it now and I laugh because it was terrible. I didn't last a day. The juices tasted disgusting. So I'd spent, I don't even know how much money it was.
They weren't cheap back then either.
No, they were these beautiful glass bottles and they all had turmeric or, you know, activated almonds or something fancy in them. And they just were disgusting. So I remember eventually having to tip them all out and recycle all these glass bottles.
I feel like we've got more awareness that now around, like, as a society, that like a juice cleanse is not a good thing. It is not A, necessary, B, helpful. It's probably like dangerous for some people.
Harmful, yeah.
In terms of like the amount that you're having, all of this, you know, and all of this like virtuous kind of health halo stuff, right? Like, oh, I'm being good this weekend, I'm doing a juice cleanse. That whole idea around like morality and
detoxing, cleansing.
I loved detox as a nutrition student. Which is, you know, embarrassing to think about the times that I like was just on this, you know, like, and really overtly virtuous about, do you know, like really telling everybody I knew that I was on a detox, I couldn't do this thing, which is laughable.
Nobody cares, and that's actually the point of it, really, isn't it?
I would have been interested to see what I thought when someone said to me, like, you know, your liver does that by itself, like without you necessarily controlling and restricting what you eat. But I don't know if I was in that space at that point.
Yeah, probably not. And I think that's often it. You are so deep in these things that even though it makes sense, you're not really listening.
And I think also at that time it was normal, right? Like that was a normal thing to do. Did you diet as such at that point?
I don't recall really restricting my food, but I do remember like downloading MyFitnessPal and like putting things into that and it telling me like, this is your estimated calories for the day. And it's a funny thing because I think, and I probably can credit it to my family being quite grounded around food, that, you know, they would be preparing dinner and I was living at home then and I'd go, well, why would I be having a juice? I'd rather have your meal that you've deliciously, like, you've prepared with love for me.
Minus the cabbage.
Yes, minus the cabbage, obviously. But no, I don't think I really went deep into that. And it's funny because at the time I probably almost thought I don't have the willpower to do that. Do you know what I mean? It was probably that thing of like, oh, I'm trying to do this juice cleanse, but actually mum's made spaghetti meatballs and I really like that. So I'm just going to give up on this. And it probably did feel bad about that.
I have a similar experience when I was like doing the equivalent of clean eating or whatever it was in the day. And I remember, I think I mentioned this one to you, when I had eaten 2 like pizza pinwheels out of the fridge, which were like from a birthday party the day before, like nothing like leftover party food. And I ate 2 of them and then remembered halfway through the second, like, oh, I'm supposed to be like eliminating sugar or eliminating gluten or things that I absolutely did not need to eliminate. And like deciding in that moment, like, do I spit this thing out? I've already eaten 1.5, or do I like, and I think the same, like my thought was like, oh, I couldn't even stick to that for, you know, a day, like, oh, stuff it, I won't. But there is that underlying like guilt, like, oh, I can't really do it. Like I didn't really want to be, you know, healthier or skinnier or whatever it was that was kind of driving that stuff, which that stuff seeps in, don't you think? Those those beliefs that you can't do it or you don't have enough willpower or you can't control yourself, or if there's a block of chocolate, like it's your problem as opposed to a number of factors playing into, you know, what you believe.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, you've teased me. Tell me about this hair sample.
Oh, yes. So on the back of all that stuff that I'd been through with the pageant time, that's when I started the nutrition undergrad. And so I went into that being like, okay, I'm going to be a nutritionist and I'm going to be the healthiest and I'm going to be so good and do all these
Set
things.
a good example for
Eat
everyone.
all of the right foods, all of this. And coincidentally, at the time, I had a period of really bad skin. And, it was probably something that affected me more than I realized.
Yeah.
And other people probably didn't notice. But I had this like dermatitis around my face, which was probably stress related now that I think about it. But of course, I was grasping for everything. Like, what can it be? What can it be? So I did a
What can I control that?
Literally, yes. What can I control? I did a food intolerance test. So I got sent this little kit, plucked out a bit of some of my hair, had to make sure it had the follicles still attached or something ridiculous, sent that off. And then a few weeks later,
Let me guess what you were intolerant to. Was it gluten and dairy?
They were definitely on there. So weirdly, so was, I remember, eggs and salmon. And I was like, gosh, am I like this bougie person that eats a lot of salmon? Maybe. I was living at home at the time.
And I'm intolerant to it and I didn't even know.
Didn't know, yes. But one of the funniest things that at the time, I opened it up and I was like, oh, this is rubbish. This tells me I'm intolerant to everything. And there was percentages of how much you're intolerant to every food.
So like zero evidence or actual science involved.
None
it's
at
purely
all.
like running the numbers.
Just a waste of money. But at the time I was also working at an activewear shop. And one of the biggest things that it said I was intolerant to was Lycra.
Yeah.
So it went beyond food as well. And I was like, I literally
intolerant to Lycra.
I mean,
don't eat that for lunch. No Lycra for lunch.
It was bizarre. And I was like, I live in activewear. I don't have any yes, I've got this dermatitis.
Was there a part of you that thought, is my Lycra affecting my
and that's
facial dermatitis?
I wish I could go back to this time because I remember looking at these results and laughing at them with my mum. And I don't know if part of me did it just because I was curious or, it probably wasn't super expensive. Like it was probably enough.
Yeah.
But it wasn't so expensive that I thought, no, I can't afford that. But it was. I went into this little deep time of thinking, okay, well, I'll do some raw treats and I'll make bliss balls and protein shakes and things like that I just didn't enjoy.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I remember a strong time of being quite obsessive about vegetables, but not preparing them in a way that I enjoyed and really having to think about how can I get this thing down for the health benefit. And that now that I look back, I'm like, life is way too short, my friend, to not enjoy the things you're doing on the daily. I remember kind of making smoothies, but which you'll know, as I'm now a little opposed to smoothies. We were just trying out some new Toddler Mealtimes smoothies, and I was pleasantly surprised yesterday when I actually really liked one of them. But I remember making one, but not too much fruit because I didn't want too much sugar. So I had to kind of up the veggies, but then it was really hard to drink. So I'd have to and I just think, what a waste of mental energy. That is just, so unnecessary.
Yeah.
And I think, interestingly, our degree was probably a bit ahead of its time in some ways, in that they really tried to beat out of you, in a way, this kind of holier than thou approach to food. I feel like there was a lot of kind of grounding. I came out of my degree really aware that it wasn't this kind of moral high ground necessarily, but I think we probably weren't up to speed at that point with kind of this perception of bodies, that there are a variety of bodies and we're not all aiming for everyone to be this kind of slim, particular body shape. And I think that's coming more so now. And that's, I think, a big societal trend too, right? I do remember, and this is really embarrassing and cringy because I do not identify with this at all anymore. And I thought actually I was trying to be cool at the time. I don't know if this outdates you, but at high school I remember we had a Forever Friends journal. And so it was this journal you had to fill in about, so you would have it and then you would give it to all of your friends or lots of people at school, and they would fill in a section about themselves. And so they would talk about what your name is and what your pets are, and you have to put a little photo in, and then
I do remember
you would say what you want to be when you grow up. And I would write, because I always knew I wanted to be a dietitian, but I would write, I want to make the world skinny. And I'm like, now that I think about that, that was purely to be cool. Like, I actually don't know that I believed that, but I thought that was like, I always felt the pressure writing these things, because you'd read someone else's page and be like, oh, like, that's so well put together. I can't think of anything to write about myself. And so I used to put that in people's journals. And now that I think about it, I'm like, wow, that was so inappropriate and so like unhelpful and damaging and like that. But that was like of our time.
I think when you think about what we thought was normal back then, the easiest example is to like go back and watch a movie from the early 2000s. And now there are certain movies that I would have said that I loved when I was younger. And I look at them, I'm like, I don't know if I can actually watch that. Or watching
The Biggest Loser, as an example. Like, we watched that as a family. Like, we watched people weighing themselves and, like being flogged by these personal trainers and having this restrictive diet as like national entertainment. Like, that would not fly now. Like, we have come a reasonable way. But that only finished less than 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's actually wild, isn't it?
It blows my mind. All right. Anything else as a student dietitian that kind of you remember? What did you eat? Do you remember what you used to take for lunch and things?
Not really. I think I used to buy lunch a fair bit at uni, because I did move out of home during the undergrad as well. And so then I definitely had some some dodgy cookbooks that probably were rather unhelpful, probably low sugar, probably low carb, all of those things. I
had the CSIRO diet cookbook, and I remember there was a huge focus on protein and like low carb. And I remember making a sandwich. Like, I used a recipe for the sandwich, which should be a bit of a red flag. Like, do I really need a recipe? But this sandwich had 200 grams of ham in it. Like, I don't even buy 200 grams for our family of 4.
So much ham.
Like, it is so much ham. And I remember my mum and I eating this sandwich together, because I was like, yeah, come do this thing with me. And we've cut this sandwich and it's literally just ham. And she was like, are you sure about this? And I was like, yeah, I've read all the stuff. Oh, wow. Neither of us could eat that, but we had to pull half the ham out. Like, what a joke.
Yeah. What a waste of ham as well.
I know. I know. Oh, how funny. Yeah, I do remember like very focused on like vegetables. Really, like I feel like to a level that was probably not a healthy kind of balanced approach to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think those cookbooks that I had, it would have been under this halo of like, here's a recipe full of vegetables, but actually it was low in probably grains and nothing ever had much sugar in it,
or fat, heaven forbid at that point.
Yes. So that was always the sort of, I don't know, the disguise, wasn't it? It's like, oh, but you're having lots of vegetables.
Yes.
So it's great.
I'm just being healthy, that's all. I'm not dieting. I'm just like focusing on the nutritious foods. But that all has some kind of subtext, doesn't it? Yeah. What do you think? Where did you change?
So I think, along the way, obviously some of these experiences, I was thinking, this just doesn't seem right. And things kind of, I don't know, came up along the way. I do remember at some point in our degree being shown that poodle science video, which, have you not seen that?
I don't know if I have.
We'll have to share it.
Put it in the show notes.
Put it in the show notes. There you go. It's probably a really, really basic way of explaining that all bodies are supposed to be different. And so it's a little cartoon.
I think I have. Yes.
And it's like the poodles are trying to make the bulldogs the same shape as a poodle, but actually that's not going to happen. So it's obviously a very entry level.
I like it.
And it's probably oversimplified. There might be people that don't think it's helpful. But I remember seeing that and thinking, yeah, that's really interesting. And being a dog person, obviously I latched onto that. I was like, yes, there's no way my Labrador is going to be the size of a Chihuahua. Yeah, absolutely not.
And he shouldn't eat like a Chihuahua either.
No, definitely not. Exactly. And so I think there were little things along the way, but probably it wasn't until really I was practicing as a dietitian. I was being referred, particularly this is in a private practice. I was in a medical centre pretty much bulk billing patients, or they had a very small gap fee. And I was referred, most of my patients came in for weight loss. And some of these patients, I really vividly remember me trying to explain to them that actually we don't need you to lose weight, or, and I couldn't quite, explain this to them. I hadn't quite got the language or my own understanding yet, I suppose.
Or your own undying belief, don't you think? Until you feel that, how damaging that is, until you can recognize that, in your core, you actually just can't bring people along with you.
No. So I was doing these wishy-washy things of, okay, look, your GP says you should lose weight. Okay, you've got high blood pressure, so potentially you could lose weight and it could help, but we know that this many diets don't work. And it wasn't helpful for anyone really. But there are a couple of patients that I specifically remember as being this big red flag for me, thinking, no, there's got to be something else I can do for this patient. This patient isn't, going to benefit from weight loss.
Yeah. Or is eating a fairly varied, enjoying their food.
Yeah. And without sort of giving too much away, patient confidentiality. There were a couple of patients. There was one lady, she would have been probably in her early 70s. The GP had referred her on to me for weight loss. She had no other health conditions. She was completely happy what she was eating, how her body felt, how she moved. And she was just so lovely. She came in and she said, look, I don't really want to lose weight. I'm quite comfortable where I am and what I'm eating. I don't want to change my diet. And I sort of said, great. Do you know what? I'm so pleased for you. Carry on.
Hang on to that, And
it was so refreshing, because at the same time, I was seeing patients with malnutrition in the hospitals that I'm trying to beg and plead these elderly people to eat more, because they've got no fat reserves on them, essentially. So I was seeing this sort of funny, both sides of that. But I think the biggest red flag for me was a patient that was referred to me for weight loss. She had polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I asked her early on when we started working together, she had this big goal. She wanted to lose a lot of weight. And I said to her, sort of, when was there a time in your life that you were lost this weight? And she actually told me that time was when she was engaging in binging and purging, and she was drinking and partying and really at her lowest in her mental health. And I just thought, this is so inappropriate. I have been back there, referred this woman, and this is her history. And so I think from there, I really did a deep dive, particularly into some of these medical conditions where it is somebody gets this diagnosis and their GP says, okay, go lose 5 to 10% of your body weight. And I thought, no, I don't want to be the dietitian that does that. I want to actually treat this as a condition rather than the body size. So that's probably where I sort of went more down the sort of anti-diet approach, because I didn't want to cause any more harm.
Yeah. And I think it's tricky, because a lot of those referrals come from this idea that the obesity epidemic is getting worse. There's a thing that there is a blanket, this body size, anything above a BMI of 25 is not okay. And actually that's being disproven quite considerably now, that actually that's not appropriate. We know that BMI is not an appropriate measure. I remember doing BMI, my own BMI in a nutrition lab, at uni, and being 26 or something so I was categorized as overweight, and that stayed. I remember exactly where I was. I remember having to declare that to the class, and this really judgment assigned to something when I was I feel quite happy in my body. That's probably one of the lowest weights I've been in my life, but it still was it's crazy.
You didn't fit in the box.
Yeah. And whose box? Make your own box.
Literally. Imaginary box.
Yeah. And what are you still seeing commonly in people around you, do you think? That doesn't kind of seem problematic, but kind of raises red flags for you?
I think I've probably been quite selective on the people that I hang out with more. So I think my inner circle, I'm seeing less and less of it. And we have more conversations about how things have changed and why we don't necessarily, why we don't talk about other people's bodies and, you know, why actually our appearance isn't the most important part of us.
Same.
But I think in general, there are things like I still get like, I don't know, a bit of an irk when I see, an ick, I should say, when I see things like, oh, here's a healthier carrot cake recipe, or this
guilt-free.
Oh, yes, all of those things. And like that's something that I know that I was a part of when I first started nutrition. We talked about that off camera when I had a blog, I, did that. And now I can look back and say, actually, no, there's no such thing as, there shouldn't be such thing as a guilt-free cookie, because
all food should be guilt-free.
Yes, exactly. All cookies are cookies. And if I'm going to make cake, I'd rather make actual delicious cake than something that doesn't satisfy me. So that's something I think, particularly within that dietetics community, that I see a lot.
And I think that's something that still takes a lot of retraining your brain. Like I will find myself at times finding it hard to trust myself when like I do feel like more of that particular thing. There is still a part of me that's like, oh no, that's enough. Whereas I do fully believe now that if I have something delicious and I eat it until I feel satisfied, I can actually stop when I want to. And that doesn't have to be a predetermined amount. It doesn't have to. And I feel so much more satisfied by food now as compared to, say, 10 years ago when I would be like, just a small bowl of that. Or no, I won't have the, topping that goes with this thing, or I'll, not eat all of it. And that, like, I think I was lucky to come out fairly unscathed from some of those things to now a point when I actually can trust my body and myself, and I can exercise for enjoyment, not for, working off calories. And I think I definitely cringe when I hear that in kind of exercise classes still, like, you'll burn this many calories. It's like, is that really why we're here doing these things? Like,
no. But I think definitely the thought process, I know I've had some people in my life, they'll come over and they'll sort of see, oh, you've got so much chocolate in your house, or so many, you've got a thing of cookies just sitting on the bench there, don't you eat them all? And it's actually knowing that I can have them anytime.
And I can eat all of them if I actually feel like that. And maybe at sometimes in the month I might feel like that.
Yes.
But also like then at other times I won't. And all of that stuff, like I think our bodies are so incredible at like balancing that stuff out. And that like I feel like watching my kids do that is another fuel for me, that like actually we're born with these skills. And it's this idea of diet culture or societal beliefs that actually take that away from us rather than kind of encouraging it. Would you, like, if you think about our Toddler Mealtimes members, I feel like they're in the starting point of this real kind of lifelong relationship with trusting your own body and your child's body. And that like can take a lot of work to get your head around.
Definitely. I think it even starts earlier than that. It starts in baby meal times. We see it in the mothers groups or the parents groups for the intro to solids that Nat and I run. Like often it'll come up the sort of, how much should I feed my baby? And there is this fear that, you're going to overeat them. Yes, there's the flip side of, am I underfeeding them? But there is that thing that, what if I give them too much? Or is it a problem if I give them fruit? Are they going to get a sweet tooth and they're going to be ruined for the rest of their life? Like there's a lot of these fears around food.
And they're valid, like in that
understandable.
Experience, they're valid, but they're so reflective of this idea around diet culture and not having too big a body, and this, all that stuff can cause a lot of harm if it's left unchecked. I see it definitely in people commenting on, I think definitely now less, but commenting on other people's bodies or weight loss or you look great, have you lost weight, being this idea that like you're better now if you've lost weight and not appreciating that is like A, inappropriate, B, potentially triggering for lots of people. And just this insinuation that you didn't look good before, or I was judging you and your body prior to this, and kind of not
like even just someone's always watching your body.
Yes, someone's monitoring the size of your body. It's wild, isn't it? Yeah, that comes up a lot. Anything else? And I guess like for you and I, we're both still fairly like early in our learning about this. Like I'm aware that there are times I think or say things that like don't come out quite right, and I don't necessarily have the perfect language, and probably never will, because I've had like 30 something years of learning a particular way, and it does take a bit of unlearning, I think, to recognize these things for what they are. And it's not about like me and a lack of willpower and a need to be better with eating. And actually like that does take a bit. And I would say, for almost all of us, we've had a big impact from society and others, but it does take a long time to undo.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and that's the thing, it's not actually going to be an overnight change ever. It's a really slow and gradual change in mindset, then followed by sort of small changes in actions. That is really what we're going for.
How much nicer is it to live like this?
Oh, it's so much better.
So much. All right. What has been your biggest lesson, do you think, from working as the Toddler Mealtimes rep? What have you learned the most from your experience?
Oh, it's a tricky one. When you sent this question in advance, I did think about it a little bit. And I thought, I started going off on one tangent. I thought, no, actually, the key thing that Toddler Mealtimes has actually taught me is that parents are just trying to do their best, and they just want to be listened to. I think that is one of my biggest things in terms of making sure we're servicing our members, is that they just want to be heard. And there's nothing worse than sort of being, told, oh, that's normal, don't worry about it. I think that's probably the most anxiety-inducing comment you can give a parent.
In our actual processes doc, there's like, do not tell people like it's fine, don't worry about it. Like we actually do have to hear the concern when we're answering questions or doing consults, and like what is underneath that? What is the fear? How do we actually help you to trust your toddler? Like that's a big, and I do think like in toddlerland, if you go to get help about nose and throat stuff, constipation, like you are regularly dismissed if you haven't said the right words or explained the thing in detail, or fussy eating. I mean, how many people are told like, oh, it's
that's
just
normal.
Go on,
that's
whatever.
fine.
That's a really and as a parent myself, like if I have a concern, I need to talk about all the things that come along with that. It's not just this one kind of little bit that you just tell me not to worry about, because I do not worry about that.
That telling someone not to worry about something has never in the history of the world
ever
helped them stop worrying. I think we forget that.
We honestly, I think that can be really, and we've such short appointment times with people, right? Like if you need to get advice on a particular topic, it's really hard to get a detailed and thoughtful answer that accounts for where you're at in all of the challenges that you parenting and life, any appointment. All right, my last two questions, which I ask everybody. Tell me about one of the weirdest things you've ever eaten. Bit of a change in tack.
I feel like you're going to be disgusted by this.
God, I'm so ready. Is it potato related?
I have eaten raw squid tentacles.
Raw squid tentacles? What is the texture of that like?
So, as you would imagine, slimy, a little bit chewy, but also tastes like squid, squid rings.
Really?
So interesting. It also did have a bit of a wasabi sort of dressing on it.
Is it a restaurant?
It was interesting. It was in Perth as well, Perth Japanese restaurant.
Really?
I didn't hate it. Oh, it's one of those ones that I probably couldn't eat loads and loads of, but a little bit was fine. Okay. Yeah, interesting.
And finally, what's for dinner in your house tonight?
So this is no lie. I'm meant to be going out for dinner tonight. One of my
For
friends.
Japanese?
Well, no, but one of my friends has got COVID.
Oh,
I can't believe in 2023, COVID's still ruining
isn't
social
it?
plans.
Okay.
But, and this is also not like deliberate plug, but that means if dinner's off, I'm going to be pulling out beef massamam curry, which is a family mealtimes recipe.
Oh my God, one of my favorite family mealtime recipes.
Yes, because it makes so much, and in our household we'll have leftovers for days. But yeah, so that's me.
So good. Thank you so much for joining me. I feel like we did a pretty good job of exposing our past selves and some of these kind of challenges. I'm sure there'll be more that we can think about. It's an interesting reflection for me, particularly. I found like, oh, actually I had some really weird beliefs about food and nutrition back then. Very, interesting. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for
having
me.
Work in general.
See ya.
Bye. A huge thanks for tuning in and listening to my podcast. This is all brand new for me, so I'd love to hear your feedback. Give me a review or send me a DM. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And above all, I'd really love you to hit that subscribe button to keep listening. Thanks.